A British Army veteran will face murder charges over the killing of two people back in 1972 during a civil rights demonstration in Northern Ireland known as Bloody Sunday. Another 16 people allegedly involved will face no action, with prosecutors citing insufficient evidence. 13 people died and 15 were injured when British paratroopers opened fire at protesters in the Irish city of Derry. Demonstrators were rallying against a government law to imprison people without trial. We go live now to Mick Fealty, editor of leading Northern Irish current affairs blog Slugger O'Toole. You're very welcome to the program. Now, what's your reaction to today's charges against the former paratrooper?
Well, I think the first reaction is just to note the dignity of the families involved, because there were something like 17 soldiers who were on duty that day, who were all investigated with the public prosecutor's office, looking at the evidence, weighing it, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of disappointment because only one of those soldiers will face prosecution, despite the fact that 13 died on the day, another one died some months afterwards, and there were something like 26 shootings altogether of unarmed civilians on that particular day back in 1972. So I think, and the dignity of the families, I think, is particularly important because the legacy of something like 3,500 deaths means that there are an awful lot of other victims, both of state forces, but also anti-state forces and illegal loyalist paramilitaries who have outstanding cases and who feel that their lives and their cases have been ignored just as much as the Derry families.
As you mentioned, given that the 16 others will face no charges, does that make this a bit of an empty victory?
It's not in that sense. I mean, it remains to be seen. This is only a decision to go for prosecution. I think it's a victory in a sense for the stoicism of the Derry families for pushing it through to a point. But I think what it also illustrates is that justice delayed is justice denied. The evidential trail 47 years after these people were killed is bound to be cold, and that will be the case in many of the cold cases that are now going into the inquest queue of many families who want to find out the truth. But it is a moral victory in the sense that at least they've got this far. They've also announced a statement, a very measured statement, saying that should their scrutiny of the DPP's office fall short, they will look for a judicial review. They will even take appeals as far as the High Court and beyond. So I think there's some way to go in all of this, but at least the principle has been breached that no security force members are to be investigated. And I think that is a moral victory for the families.
And what do you think about Britain's Defence Secretary offering full support to the accused officers?
Well, the Defence Secretary probably feels some moral obligation since, ultimately speaking, he is responsible in political terms for the British Armed Forces. And so he may feel that on a personal level. He may also feel that his office demands that. Where I take issue with some of the statements he and some of his cabinet colleagues have made in the past is the idea that some form of amnesty can be extended to security forces that would not also be extended to members of illegal organisations who carried out bombings, who carried out the mass execution of civilians throughout the war. If you give an amnesty to one set of people, you must, by human rights law, extend it to everyone, and I don't think that. I don't think that is a defensible or a justifiable position.
Now, one brother of a Bloody Sunday victim says he's relieved that the veteran will be prosecuted. Do you think that reflects the Northern Irish public opinion as a whole?
No, because as with all of these stories of victims, there are differing levels of sympathy depending on which political side you're on. My own personal view is that none of these people, whether they be victims of the British security forces, the provisional IRA, or the various loyalist organisations, none of these victims volunteered to be victims. And all of them should be held in some kind of equal esteem. One of the great failures, in my view, of the peace process, or the so-called peace process, is that most of the victims and their welfare has been swept aside for matters of political expedience on all sides, and very often are used as political football by supporters of one faction or another to prove that their case was more or less moral than the other.
Earlier, you used the word unjustifiable. In 2010, then PM David Cameron called these killings unjustifiable. Have British authorities done enough in the eyes of the victims' families? And if not, what more do they want to see? What can they expect to see, if anything?
Well, I think we have to take a case-by-case account. Even though there's a prosecution in train, we can't presume that that person is guilty. But I do think that there is a relief, and that brother of the victim is probably expressing a very deeply felt reflex that we must see how this goes forward. At least, I mean, there is an account in a British conservative newspaper or magazine called The Spectator by Douglas Murray, who says in there that he spent time at the Savile inquiry, which took years to investigate these events. And he said that this particular Soldier F, as he is referred to, the names are not given, that Soldier F, he felt, was an unwilling contributor to that inquiry. And I think the families will feel that at least due process has been done where it can be done. And they will work, I think, to ensure that goes further. The difficulty, I think, is not so much in families who are able to get justice or seeing justice to be done. It's in the vast majority of cases where justice will not be seen to be done. And we see in the failure to get sufficient evidence in this case that the rules of evidence are against the victims and the families of victims. When a trail goes cold, it is remarkably difficult to pick that up and deliver the justice that people so richly deserve.
Mick Fealty, editor of the Slugger O'Toole blog, thank you so much for your insights and your time today.